without further ado, let me just turn to Guntram and Maria. I just really want to unpick the 3 key words on the cover of your proposals and your memos to the Commission this year. You say braver, greener, fairer. And to me, that sounds like guiding principles. I think a lot of time in this town, we look a lot at granular policy, we look a lot at legislation, we look a lot at progress process. And in this era of really counteracting dynamics in the Union and in the drama of Brexit, I think it's fascinating that you've chosen to put those principles front and center. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit to us about what these principles mean practically.
Thank you very much, Martina. And again, also let me also extend a very, very welcome to all of you to our annual meeting. As you said, Martina, this is very much the principles that we want to put forward. There's 21 of us that were involved in writing this memo. There has been a lot of discussions, a lot of back and forth in terms of what we think we want to say, and a lot of disagreements as well. However, the one thing that is crucial, I think, in terms of underlying this set of memos is that we all agree that the new leadership needs to be bolder in the way they move forward. And we started with that, and braver in terms of what types of decisions they take. And to complement that, there needs to be a lot of emphasis on the green aspects of the policies that we go forward, not just on policies that are directly related to climate, but everything that we do need to have sufficient consideration for the footprint that it leaves behind. And last, but certainly not least, fairness policies, be it from the process of globalization, of reversing it, all the way down to socioeconomic policies. They need to be fairer. Distribution elements need to be at the core of the agenda. So these are the 3 principles that underline all of the recommendations that we make, and we're hoping that the new leadership will be bolder as they move forward.
But what does it mean that the Commission needs to be brave? I mean, you know, no offense to Commission employees here, but when you look at them, they don't scream bravery. So just talk to me substantially in terms of what is it to be brave, you know, de facto means you're different. So what is it that you're calling them to do differently and bravely compared to what's been done before?
Well, perhaps the one point I would say on this is we think this is also an aspirational title, right? I mean, we do think European citizens in surveys do say very clearly, we want Europe to be part of the solution when it comes to geopolitics. We don't want my individual country to be talking to Donald Trump, to be talking to the Chinese President Xi Jinping. We want basically the European Union to take a lead. The same for climate policies. We don't want, and that's very clearly visible in surveys, we don't want individual countries to fix the climate problems. We want there to be some sort of a European strategy. And the same for fairness, for example, taxation. There's lots of surveys showing that actually citizens are unhappy with taxation being done only at the national level, allowing some corporate tax evasion that's quite significant in some cases. So citizens look for solutions in Europe. The surveys still confirm that. And that's why we chose this a little bit more aspirational title to sort of transmit these messages. And it's not only addressed to Commission staff. I mean, it's also addressed, of course, to the President herself or to her commissioners. And I think they really need to take a lead here and, yes, aspire for a better functioning EU.
Right. And do you think that this setup is sort of fit for purpose in the sense that the input that the new Commission gets and the new President gets, is that sufficiently sort of frank? Is it sufficiently honest so for these messages to come through? Do you think that, you know, people who don't like bureaucracies and don't like the way the EU works and functions, the way Brussels functions, would say that the continuity of the so-called Eurocrats, and some people use that term not generously, let's put it that way, indicate that actually it is very hard to break with continuity, and the change of commissions, of course, as we see this morning, is a natural moment to reflect on all these things, but really the course of these policies doesn't change. I feel maybe there's something particularly opportune about this moment in history globally. Could you talk to us a little more maybe about why this moment in history does call for the European Union to play a different role altogether, actually, on the global scene?
If I may, continuity is a very good word in the way that you described it. We need continuity for policies because that gives us also predictability. But actually, I very strongly believe that more of the same simple won't do. So I think this is a good time to stop and think, what do we need to do next? And why is it an opportune moment? I think it's a challenging moment as well as an opportune. There are problems that are coming to us that are probably different than what we've seen before. And I have a sense that certainly by comparison to the past 5 years, we are now at a very different moment. If you start from the issue of globalization, we are probably in the process of reversing it. The threat of trade wars, some actual trade wars going on. Where is that going to lead to? What would that mean for the way that we do business in the future? This is something that we can affect as Europe, but only we are one Europe. And we should affect it in a way that is better for the average citizen in Europe and beyond. So I think that's a very important challenge that we need to think about. And we need to think about it differently than we have up till now. And the second one, of course, is then the biggest, in my view, is climate. It is an emergency. It's no longer something that we can sort of, trot around. There's something, we need concrete actions on climate, and this is the time to do it.
Right. I'm just going to stop doing too much of the talking because I've only had one coffee as well. And I'm going to take some questions. And thank you so much for participating. I think we're being live streamed. And using the exact same method, I'd really invite people who are watching us remotely to send questions as well. Wow, a lot of anonymity. I like it. I mean, the EU's for the private and anonymous web, so this seems on message. There's some sort of inside baseball questions that I think you guys might have something, illuminating to add to. For example, anonymous asks, how to structure the new commission optimally? So this town loves to talk about process, but this does seem to be an important question on process that actually impacts outcomes.
Yes.
Any memos on structure?
Well, let me say on the structure and the process of how to change the course of the ship, how to change just the bureaucrats doing business as usual. Of course, there is a big discussion how political should the Commission be, and the last Commission was very proud to have been a political Commission with political guidelines. The next one, we have not yet heard the full extent to which they will and want to be political, but it seems to me the direction of travel is one where the political leadership wants to take a stronger hold on messages, a stronger hold on what are the key issues. And so that then translates into the sort of more administrative question, how do you organize an institution? And there, I think my point of view certainly is that it depends very much also on the style of the Commission President. So you have a Commission President who might be very inclusive in her approach or very hierarchical, but I think we do need to think in terms of, certainly in terms of substantive clusters. I mean, there's clusters around climate policy. Climate policy is not just about some marginal industrial policy issue or some marginal taxation issue. It's about bringing all of these things together. It's not affecting just one commissioner. It's affecting basically everyone.
Right. Digital
issues, it's several issues, right? I mean, several departments are affected. So you need to organize the work, of course, in a way that, these big priorities get translated into actual policies in all the various departments.
Sure. And just one last thing for me, and I think we're going to catch up on our small delays this morning. The traffic in this town is terrible. I've just moved here, and geez. I'd like to follow up on this idea of the political commission. A lot of people love it, and a lot of people hate it. And in a time when, it's not really clear what Europeans think, it can be a very controversial position to take. Controversial is not bad, and often seeking the least common denominator, we come out at suboptimal outcomes. But could one of you maybe talk a little bit about continuing on the path of a very political commission in these times? And what's really the benefit of doing that?
So on the issue of the Political Commission, I think there are two issues here, and the European Commission has got really two roles, and this is a discussion that we've had very extensively at Bruegel and beyond. And one of the functions that it has is to set legislation and to recommend legislation that is going to be voted. Now, when you're a legislator and you're proposing legislation, it's very difficult to think of doing that apolitically. You cannot be apolitical when you are proposing legislation. You have to fit in a political context that is determined by electoral decisions that have been made in the electoral cycle. And I think there is inevitable. I think the European Commission needs to play a role that is political. That's one thing. But there's another function the European Commission has, and that is to enforce the treaties. Now, where you're enforcing the treaties, you need to be neutral. Now, there is the bit that, because otherwise you're also running the risk of actually undermining your own credibility. And I think there is the bit that you shouldn't be political, you shouldn't be choosy, you should be neutral and as fair as you possibly can.
Flexible, now, perhaps, but non-partisan. That's the way I would phrase it.
So I think it's important not to mix the two. So when we're talking about a political commission, there may be rights and there may be wrongs why you may be arguing this, but I think it's important to distinguish the two functions.